Welcome back. In this video, we're going to finish submitting a task by determining the task and subtask timeouts. These are really important settings to consider when you're adding a task to the network. When you first start using Golem, it's important to start on the testnet and use a small file just to make sure that your setup is correct. Once you've successfully submitted a smaller task to the test network, you can move on to the mainnet to leverage greater computational power to render larger and more complex Blender files. The task timeout setting determines the overall task timeout threshold, or how long you are willing to wait to have your task completed by the network. This setting should be much higher than your subtask timeout, and significantly higher than you expect your render to take, just to be safe. If your task times out before it's finished rendering, you'll have to resubmit the task. So setting a high task timeout threshold is very helpful. Subtask amount tells the network how many subtasks to break your task into before sending them to different nodes. Generally, if you're rendering a number of frames, you should set subtasks to the same number. The subtask timeout setting determines the threshold of all of your individual subtasks. This setting should be significantly lower than the overall task timeout. If your task timeout is set to 10 hours, for example, you can set your subtask timeout to somewhere around 30 minutes. If your subtask times out while a node is trying to compute it, it will be assigned to a different node. If your subtask setting is too high, then you could get stuck with a weak node trying to compute your task. If your subtask setting is too low, then even a high-powered node might have trouble computing your task in time. This is why it's important to use the testnet to render a few files in the beginning, so that you can understand how the settings work and what fits best for your workflow. When you move to the mainnet, you'll be able to use much greater computational power, so having your settings figured out beforehand will help you in the long run. If your task times out before it's finished computing, you may have to resubmit the task and then end up paying more for your computation. So once you've set the proper task timeout thresholds, you can move on to pricing, which is what we'll discuss in our next video. If you have any other questions, please refer to the documentation that we have linked in the description of this video.